Hi everyone, how's it going? I'm Bonnie Violet. I'm a trans femme, genderqueer, spiritual drag artist, and digital chaplain, and this is my guest co-host.
I'm Pacey. I'm a trans mask, non-binary advocate, I guess, for mental health and recovery.
And you have found yourself on the Trans Joy Boise podcast. This is our first official episode outside of the pilot. So still like a little squirrely, I think, but we're also like just another level closer to getting where we want to be.
Definitely. We should incorporate a view of the setup that we have because it's very much kind of jerry-rigged at the moment, but we're still getting this out.
Yes, indeed. And today is November the 20th. 2024, which is Trans Day of Remembrance. And so we wanted to go ahead and start off this episode with the lighting of a candle for those who have passed to violence in the year of 2024 and beyond, and just any kind of I guess really just to recognize any trans and non-binary folks that are no longer with us in body or might even just be struggling.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great idea. Ooh, what a lighter.
It's fancy, but it's not like, it's just like a little $6 lighter. It's not, it looks really fancy, but it's not.
We have an event today and for Trans Day of Remembrance, and I'm really kind of nervous about it. I think last night I had a conversation with my mom on the phone, which was, really uncomfortable because personally in my life, like my transition is kind of unspoken. Like we don't really talk about it. It's like sort of the elephant in the room. Like we know that it's going on, like it's very obvious that it's happening, but we just don't really address it. And I had a conversation with my mom last night and she said, me and your dad, we're going to do anything that we have to keep you safe.
Oh, wow.
And if that means helping you try to leave the country or move to a different city or even find somewhere safer in Boise, we want to help you. And I realized that, I'm very lucky. I'm very privileged to have that kind of relationship with my parents, but also it was very sobering to realize that that's where we're at right now politically, that we have to start thinking about these things. And it really kind of emphasized the importance of today for us and the event that we're doing tonight.
Yeah, totally. How was that for you? That seems like such a light switch to not being talking about it at all, to then all of a sudden almost like the extreme of like, I want to protect you.
It was, it's so strange because I have always had this inherent sense of shame regarding gender, like in any sense.
Yeah.
And I don't like talking about it. Even, as an adult with other trans people, it makes me really uncomfortable still. Like that's where I'm at in my journey. And when I talk to my family about it, I still just feel shame, like it's something that we shouldn't be talking about, but
did it still feel that way last night or?
A little bit, but I'm moving past it now because even now with my sister, we've been talking a little bit more and now it just seems like they understand and we're learning to navigate it as a family.
Yeah.
So this is something that I never necessarily even wanted. I never really wanted to have those dialogues with my family.
Yeah.
But now that it's kind of been forced upon us, I feel a lot more comfortable having them. But it's still, I'm very new to it still.
Yeah. Well, it's such an interesting thought. Also, like my mom told me the other day that she worries about me, and I was like, don't worry about me. Like I'm fine. So, but I remember also thinking like, I don't want that sort of burden. It's like that weird thing of like feeling like, oh, they're thinking about me. They care about me. They realize that things might be tough for me. And it's their way of saying it. But then it's also like, oh crap, like they're worrying about me, And so it's kind of this weird sort of like.
Yeah, I feel like there are so many other things about me and all of us,
right.
In general, aside from just being trans or non-binary,
But the world doesn't often let us. Exactly. Like I would love to exist and my transness not be a thing, but it's like we just can't go anywhere without it being a thing, at least right now. And whether it's like, for a while it's our own shit and it's our own process of trying to get on the other end of things. But even when we get on the other end of things, we still have to deal with every other person who kind of has an issue or constantly coming out whenever we're in the grocery store or we're in a new place or whatever, and kind of having or getting to deal with different people's reactions, good, bad, or otherwise. And so it makes it really difficult to just go and not be a trans person in the grocery store, or not be a trans person at work, or not be a trans person in the bathroom, or, you know, any of those sorts of things where it's just like, you know, I'm just another person who needs to urinate, or who needs some bread, or that sort of thing. Yeah.
It's really dehumanizing.
Yeah.
For me anyway, to be reduced to this one trait that I have, you know, because I'm so much more than that. You know, everyone is so complex, and then to be reduced to an argument, you know, a talking point of just like you're trans, and all of these people that never cared before it was a political, you know, argument. And that comes back around to talking about it with my family, because it seems like the relationship I have with my family is so beyond such a small thing about me, about myself.
Yeah.
And it feels really bad. You know, it's depressing to realize that out of all the accomplishments that you've done in your life, all of these things, you know, degrees, it doesn't matter, because you are a trans person, and that is the most important thing about you. And that's what we're creating legislation about. And we are determining your right to exist because of this.
Yeah.
And that's something that I've really been coming to grips with lately. You know, even in the positive conversations I have with my parents, it's still highlighting the fact that right now that is my defining characteristic.
Yeah. Well, and like for me, that's what's like, my father cut me out of his life a few years ago when I told him that I was trans. And when you were just talking about how like we can have all these accomplishments and do all these sorts of things, and my dad has always been very proud of me. He wasn't always happy with decisions that I was making or the life that I was living, but he was always proud of me. And now he is not that person, you know, and it's literally just because I'm trans. And so it's hard to understand. I mean, it took me 40 some years to actually transition. So I get it. Like, I get that it's not just like, I don't know, like, I don't know. It's like a big thing. I think just given when the time that I grew up, the time when my parents grew up, where I grew up in Wendell, you know, I just think that many of us haven't had to wrestle or wrap around or think of the idea or the possibility that one, I could be trans, or that he could have a trans child, or, you know, any of those sorts of things. I think is just like, you know, we're getting started so much later in life that it's really hard sometimes to feel like as like 40s, or my dad's in his 60-year-olds, to be like needing to learn some shit or grow in ways that hopefully people are starting younger, you know, than what we are. But I mean, even like just to kind of go there a little bit, you, and not to put too much, but will you talk a little bit about like your transition and when that started for you? Because I know you've been dabbling in it a little longer than I have.
Absolutely. Like, I had a pretty stereotypical trans childhood, I think. You know, I always knew from a very young age. My family always knew, you know, because I didn't play with dolls. Like, I had Ninja Turtles, you know, I played X-Files, and I was always Mulder. I never wanted to be Scully. And whenever we would go to the store and we'd be looking at the toys, I would like cover my eyes when we would walk down the doll aisle, because even at that age, I had such shame, because I was like, I am a little boy and you're making me like dress like a little girl. And even other students treated me like a little boy. So if like my mom would make me wear a dress for picture day, I wouldn't hear the end of it until like the end of the fucking year.
Right.
But I mean, when I was in my 20s, it was still something that was like not talked about. Which is so, it's simultaneously really cool that like this younger generation has access to it, but it also is kind of heartbreaking that we didn't have access to it at such a young age. But I was in like my mid to late 20s when I realized like there are options for people like me, and I want to pursue them. So I got on testosterone. And the doctor that I was seeing I think that it was so new to him that he didn't necessarily know how he was supposed to be monitoring my levels. So I never had the therapeutic dose of testosterone. So I never got really the effects that I wanted. I just had some, like my voice got a lot deeper, and I got really horrible acne. And I was like, okay, this is a bummer deal. But I got to a point in my transition where I realized that the next step for me would be a surgery, like probably top surgery. And I had to I researched it. And at that time, I struggled with a lot of mental illness. And I saw that it was really common for people to deal with depression immediately following a surgery like that. And I thought in my mind, like, it's more important for me to be able to just accept who I am and be comfortable in androgyny. And I think that there was a lot of, still this inherent shame that I was dealing with. And that was the easiest answer for me socially, because it's so much easier to live not as a trans person. Like, goddamn, it's brutal sometimes.
Right.
So I stopped taking hormones for a few years, and I was just living right in the middle of like the gender spectrum pretty comfortably. And then I moved around, and I finally moved back to Boise, and I started working at a queer bar. And being surrounded by that all the time, I felt a lot more comfortable to kind of experiment with my gender. And I ended up realizing, like, no, I was right. This is ridiculous. And I got back on hormones just last year.
And you were experiencing other people seeing you that way too. Like, even, right. Like, even if you weren't fully there yet, other people were like asking you, like, are you a they, them, or are you, right? Because I remember you telling me about that.
Yeah, I was working, and this lady came up, and like, she thought she was an ally. And I think that maybe she was trying, but she asked a question. I had to leave the bar and help her with something. And she's just like, are you one of them he, she, thems? And I was like, oh my God. So I used it as my tagline, or as my bio on Facebook for a long time.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. Like, I started getting people just automatically defaulting to like he, him pronouns for me. And I was like, not even on testosterone. I was like, that's weird. But it was also because politically it was becoming more prevalent and seeing it in the news. Like, all these people that otherwise had no idea were like, oh, I heard about this transgender phenomenon. And like, so that I started being recognized for it a little bit more, which was...
It's like a mixed bag, right?
Yeah. It feels almost great. Dangerous sometimes, but it feels great. Yeah,
it's like affirming, and then also like, oh, shoot, they clocked me.
Exactly.
And it's like, if they're clocking me, then who else is clocking me? And, it's fine if it's somebody who's like cool with us, or at least don't care. But, when it's the people who do have a problem, that's when it can make me a little nervous. And you just don't know. Like, you can come across those people all the time.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And now those people are a lot louder, and it's definitely a nerve-wracking time. Yeah. So tell me more about your transition.
My transition. I feel like I'm so new into it still. And I'm also still struggling with like where to look.
Me too. We've got a lot going on. I'm
like, tell us what to do, people. So, because I have a hard time like staring at like this and not you. So we'll do this and we'll see what they have to say.
Okay. We'll do both.
You tell us.
I keep like catching glimpses at that one.
I know, right? I'm like, I don't know. So I think, because I think it also can be weird just to be staring at them and talking, you kind of got to cheat it a little bit. I think that's the word they use. Anyway, like, I don't remember a lot of my childhood, so I don't remember below the age of 12. So I don't recall necessarily like ever thinking I was a girl or asking why or any of those sorts of things. I had Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I had He-Man, but part of that was those were like acceptable dolls to have, as a boy or somebody being raised as a boy. And so I don't think I ever had the words or the thoughts, and maybe I did, I just don't recall them. And I've tried to talk with my family about it, and no one's let it out if I ever did, which I don't think really matters. I think for a long time, because I thought in order to be trans, you had to like feel like a woman trapped in a man's body. Like, I never felt trapped in my body. But also like, I didn't live in my body much. Like, I didn't really know how to embody my body until I transitioned. Like, I didn't even really know what I was missing out on. And so it wasn't necessarily something that, I was constantly getting corrected as a kid for being feminine, what I would call feminine now. I think at the time it was my dad saying, like, my dad tried to make me more of a man, right, so that I would be safe in the world. You know what I mean? But I don't even think he was fully conscious of like trying to change me, or, you know what I mean? I don't think it was a, you're feminine kind of thing. It's just like, I'm teaching you how to be a man kind of thing, which it's a little nuanced, but I don't,
sense,
but yeah, so like, and I never read it that way as a kid. I just felt like I just was wrong. Like I just couldn't express myself in a way that was acceptable. I couldn't be comfortable and that be okay. And so I think it made me like a really nervous young person. And then I think getting into the gay world, as like a man, or understanding myself as a man at the time, I could be feminine. Like I could have those more flamboyant traits, and it was almost even expected to some degree.
Yeah.
And so it was almost like I could kind of like hide in that world for a little bit. And again, I didn't necessarily think like, oh, I'm a trans woman and I'm just gonna like be a gay person for a while. It's just like I never really thought about it.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
It never quite fully fit, but I didn't know why.
Right.
I didn't think it was because of gender. And maybe it wasn't. Because I also think that, like, I don't know, it's like when a lot of people talk about this too, when they go to meet with a doctor to talk to them about being trans, there's like this fear of not being trans enough.
Yeah.
And like, I definitely had that fear. And I remember going in and it wasn't hard for me to like there's a whole path throughout my whole childhood that would scream, okay, trans woman, but also like, but maybe not necessarily, you know what I mean? It also could be some of the traits that people just equate to being a gay guy or a gay kid or queer kid or whatever. And so, yeah, I don't know where I was going.
That makes sense. There's like a lot of crossover.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And it's taken me a long time to get to where I could see myself as a trans person, even though like I started using she, her pronouns when I was living in Chicago, like nearly a decade ago. I didn't start my transition until 4 years ago, or even identify as. And I used to even say like, I'm like, my spirit is she. Like, I don't know what's more trans than that. I'm like, it's just my spirit is she, and I'm just getting better at letting her out more. And that's why I'm more feminine or whatever. And I'm just like,
looking back on it,
like,
oh
that
my
is
God.
so trans. I mean, it could be, you know, I mean, everybody, and I think that's the thing that's important. And I think even in just us talking about our trans experience is that there's not any one experience. We each have our own unique, there might be some similarities or things that we can recognize or hear ourselves in other people, but we all have our own experience. And I think nowadays people are realizing that there are so many more ways to live as a trans person or a non-binary person, and they're seeing more types of people and how they're expressing themselves, that I think it's kind of liberating them a little bit more to kind of like go where they're more comfortable too.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, right now is such a great time to be curious about things like that.
Yeah,
you know, there's
like,
so many resources.
Yes. And
I think it's interesting that you brought up being like gay men and like the femininity. That seems like an interesting intersection for like drag and trans identity. And I think that, of course, that is what is being targeted with legislation right now and has been for several years. But it seems like it could be both confusing and really helpful to be into drag and using this persona that is feminine and like she, her pronouns, and then maybe realizing like, no, I actually really like this all the time.
Yeah. Did you read my journal? Because that's exactly, that's exactly what happened to me. Like, I don't think if I would have gotten to drag and started doing drag, would I've ever, like, I think transitioned. I think in a lot of ways it was kind of like my gateway. It was my entry point into, because it provided a space and an environment to safely try things on and do things different. And I enjoyed it and I found it affirming, and I never wanted it to go away. And it wasn't the sense of like, because there's this, whenever there's a drag king or queen or thing around, they're like the center of the room sort of feeling. And so part of me was like, is this what you're wanting more of? But it was more of like when I got home and I was still like not wanting to get out of my makeup, and I was wanting to still wear the undergarments, or, I wanted to go out in what I was wearing because I just felt so in my body
Right.
in a way that I often just lived in my head and just felt very detached from my body itself. And like doing drag caused me to really start to have a relationship with my body like I'd never had before.
That makes sense, because you mentioned that you never felt like in your body as a child. And it must have been really validating and affirming,
And
to see that in the mirror and be like, no, this feels right.
And it was kind of scary because I felt it was really a vulnerable thing for me. Like drag was really hard for me in the beginning because it was like I was revealing this part of myself that had been in there for so long and been so scared to be seen or expressed. And so it was a really liberating, but also terrifying experience. And I think probably because I was a trans person, I think people who aren't trans probably don't have that same experience,
It's like a novelty for them.
Exactly.
It's really fun.
Or they just put on like this character and become somebody else. And it was never that for me. It was just a further expansive
Your character was
of
who
myself.
you was outside of
I could never be beyond. I could never take myself out of the equation in order to just be this like persona, which has still been kind of like my downfall in really being a performer. Even though I love drag, it's just I'm not a performer because I can't let myself, like I just can't take myself out of the equation yet.
That's really interesting to think about, like, because I know so many performers. My partner's a performer, and I hear them talk a lot about like my performer is a persona. It's a character that I'm playing. So when I am performing, I am this person. I become this person, and it's interesting to think about the perspective of that being reversed. Like, I am the persona that I'm pretending to be, but once I step into drag, that's me. That's very
more
profound.
so.
I love that. Yeah,
it definitely was. I hadn't realized it at the time, but now I can look back and see that's exactly what was happening for me. It's just so wild, the experience. Like I said, it's like I never thought I was trans until I did, and then when I did, there was no one seeing it, and everything just made sense.
Oh yeah.
And now even my drag or doing drag isn't, it's just like, I used to hide in drag too, to be honest. Drag was a safe place for me to be feminine in. And now that I'm living as a feminine person always, I don't have to escape into it, if that makes sense. So I've been able to, I think, have a little bit more play in like how I present myself. Like it's not about being a woman or being even feminine. It's just about putting on drag, which for me is just lots of rhinestones. For the most part.
It's interesting, like doing this a little bit later in life, but I imagine that everyone feels this to some degree. The things that you avoided because you, like for me, for example, I hated anything pink. I hated anything that was perceived as like feminine or girly. And now as an adult, it wasn't until I got on testosterone that I truly became like a fierce feminist, because I needed, like I always was, right? But I needed a little bit of space from being like feminine and perceived as feminine
to be able
to truly respect and appreciate the beauty of things that are feminine. And that's been a really interesting process for me. But there's also a lot of mourning for the things that could have been, like all of the things that I wanted to do when I was little, but I couldn't, because like, oh, well, you can't do that. One example was I really wanted to play roller hockey. I'd play on the street with all my friends, and I was really good at it. So for Christmas, I think I was in like 5th grade. I got really nice skates. I got a hockey stick. I got all the gear, right? I was stoked. So we went to where the league was held, and I'm like, well, how do I sign up? And the guy wouldn't let me. He's like, well, pretty soon, he said to my mom, well, in just a couple years, she's going to be more into makeup and boys, so she can't play. And I'm like, well, where the fuck are you now, buddy? Because you were so wrong, and I would have been so good at it. And it's just, I know that we all have experiences like that, and it's a bummer. But it's also really liberating to be able to kind of try these new things as an adult that you missed the opportunity to do as a kid.
Well, and it's cool to be that, or attempt to be that, maybe for the you. I know like a lot of times people talk about, like being the adult you needed as a child. And so I think that's a lot of like why like, because it was so important for me to begin to see that you could exist differently, like as a trans person, as a queer person, you could express yourself in these ways, to kind of be like, oh yeah, that I can do that, or I want to do that, or that's me, because I kind of lacked the imagination. And so like it took me seeing other people to see more of me. And so if I can be something or someone that someone looks at and they see more of themselves, then I love that for them, because I know how important it was to me. And it wasn't even like because they were this amazing person, or it was just because they were existing and they were in my face in some form or fashion. You know what I mean? And that felt, I don't know. It's like, that's why I think like doing this Trans Joy Boise work, if you will, or even like doing this podcast is just, I don't know. I think there's part of that underneath is just really trying to, and again, I think we still have our inner children, you know? And so I think it's also ways of like touching and being and providing space for that inner child that, you know, not to get too woo-woo or mental health or whatever.
Right.
That's another episode.
Yeah, totally. And I think, you know, that I love that quote, like, be who you needed when you were younger. And I think, you know, I've also heard people say, like, when you grow up, you become the person that someone like you could have helped, you know, and I really try to embody that with like everything that we do with this podcast. But even being visible in times like this can be really scary, but I know that it's important for us to be visible right now for that very reason.
Well, and I thought it was interesting when you said earlier, because when we started it off, it was talking about how like you were concerned about like your family was feeling like they needed to protect you and get you out of the country. And then just a few minutes later, you were also saying, what a great time to be trans, you know,
Oh my gosh,
because there's so many opportunities and you can like your curiosity. And I think that's really the truth of the way things are right now. And it's almost like it feels so extreme, like two very big extremes versus some sort of ambiguous gray area. It does feel like I have to be freaking scared for my life and like, ooh, yay, like I get to, you know what I mean? It's this weird sort of like juxtaposition. And I think challenge is really unsettling, I think, for a lot of trans and non-binary and probably even some queer folks who aren't trans or non-binary.
You're absolutely right. Like I'll be scrolling through like TikTok or something, and I'll be thinking about what we're doing here, and I'll be so stoked that like, you know, I am finally living my authentic self, and I'm having a great time doing so many things, exploring this new version of myself. And then I'll see a video that's just absolutely terrifying, and I'm like, oh, okay, so
fuck this.
I gotta get, it like triggers like your fight or flight. It's like I got to go. I got to get out of Idaho. I got to get out of the country. But I think I feel like 2 weeks ago, things were very different. I felt very different prior to the election.
I think the election illuminated a lot for folks. I think maybe there was some sort of hope or some thought that things could change. Yeah. But I think that kind of went away for a lot of folks.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's a really scary time now. And like just touching on what you mentioned earlier about not wanting to be seen as a trans person, I've been feeling that now more than ever because, like, as you know, I've been getting harassed in public a lot lately, and it's really scary. And some of the lengths that we go to kind of go unnoticed can be really uncomfortable. Like I told you before, when I go to the gym, I always wear like a big hoodie, and I'm roasting, you know, sweating, but I am just doing everything I can to kind of blend into the background because I don't want to do anything to draw attention to myself.
Yeah. And I feel like I've been having the opposite experience of feeling like I'm more comfortable being in public, but that's partially because I was so freaking scared to be in public before. You know, after the march, I feel like really liberated and free. And so in some ways I don't feel as freaked out as I once was. And that's not to say, and I think that's like, and I think folks who are trans, non-binary, queer can understand that there is kind of like, it's your own perception is huge. And then there's also the reality, you know, so there's still the reality of danger, right? Potential danger at every corner. But my perception could be to not be looking for it as closely or expecting it. You know, you still have to be mindful and aware, like I have a sixth sense or 13th sense or something, like you have a sense, but you can kind of like hush it a little bit and kind of be more present for the good stuff in some places. So it's interesting how that, again, can be happening all at the same time.
It's a pretty extreme dichotomy.
Sure.
I've just been trying to, like, my goal right now is to make it so I feel confident in uncomfortable situations. So I want
uncomfortable is different than like
uncomfortable, like for me, when I'm saying that now, I mean like the uncomfortable situation that I feel could turn into something dangerous.
Right.
So I've always been just so skinny, so thin. And I'm working with a personal trainer now, and I'm finally starting to gain some weight. And then we did like the self-defense class on Sunday, which was a riot. It was a really good time. And I think everyone left feeling empowered, even just a little bit, but even wanting to get back into martial arts, just to feel confident that I could defend myself, or I would at least have a fighting chance, has been really helpful. But it's also one of those situations where, I'm like kicking my own ass at the gym, and I'm just like, I shouldn't have to be doing this. I should be doing this because I want to, not because I'm afraid. And that's been something that,
and you do want to.
I do want to. Yeah. I've always wanted to get bigger.
It becomes louder. That becomes the louder, like, thing that's pulling you versus like, I want to do this, but then because you're like fearful or you want to be able to protect yourself or the people with you, that becomes the louder voice. But they're both true. And it's still that desire of, this is what I want to do.
But now it's like more out of necessity.
Exactly.
And so I'm glad to be doing it, and it's going to be really nice to be a lot bigger, but it's a strange time to be living through. Right now. And I'm trying to, one thing that I'd like to just touch on briefly is one thing I'm trying to let go of is just all of this anger that I have. I am always furious right now, it seems. And, just in my personal journey, I had a lot of mental illness, like debilitating major depressive disorder all my life. And then I did ketamine treatment the August before last, and I don't like even hit criteria for depression at all. So like my life has changed immensely, and I had this brief, wonderful period of feeling at peace, happy, content, at peace. And then all of this has happened again, and I'm not sure how to navigate all of the anger that I feel.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I have always been someone who's never really allowed myself to have anger, and it felt like I've either masked it or it's come out in other ways. It's been very rare for me just to own that I'm fucking angry about something. And lately I've been really angry about shit, and I've been letting myself be angry about shit, which is so weird. But I do think that's probably something that would be great for us to maybe pick up on our next episode, just because I do feel like we're probably at that point where
trans fury.
So maybe next week we can talk about trans fury. Fuck joy. I mean, joy's still there, right? Yes. So
the joy and the fury.
Yes. So So thank you all for joining us. We'll be with you in however way you decided or decide to observe Trans Day of Remembrance. And we'll see you in the next episode.
Yeah, absolutely. Perfect.
All right.
Yeah, that was solid. I would listen to that.